This is the gap theory. It was held by, has anybody ever heard of the Schofield Reference Bible? Schofield Reference Bible. Philadelphia, is anybody from Philadelphia? Schofield Reference Bible, Philadelphia College of the Bible, now Philadelphia Biblical University or whatever, had this view. In the beginning, this is the way the gap theory reads this. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So there was an initial wham, bam. God created all the stuff. Okay, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Bam. The earth then became darkness and void, formless and empty. The earth became darkness, formless, and empty. When God originally made things, did he make it good? Did he make it good? And light and things. But here, it became darkness, formless, and empty. And what people suggest then is, what the gap theory suggests, is that this is when Satan fell to the earth. Satan, as an angel of light, was cast to the earth here. And that's why it's a period of darkness. And this is when Satan then made the dinosaurs. And this is where the dinosaurs fit in. Satan is the creator of the dinosaurs, chaos on the earth, and this kind of thing. And so this is, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Satan's cast to the earth. Satan then does his thing on the earth. And then what you have is, then after Satan does his thing, God says, boom, let there be light. And there is light. And then you have the 7 days of creation. The 7 days of creation are really 7 days of what? Of recreation. For this view, the 7 days of creation, God is reforming what Satan had messed up. So this is called the gap theory. Do you see why it's called the gap theory? Because you've got God creating here. There's a gap where Satan comes in and chaos comes in, formless and empty. And then here, God starts up again. So this verse 2 then is a gap. And that's called the gap theory. Now, are there reasons to support the gap theory? And let me just run through a few of the reasons here, the pros and cons of the gap theory. The Hebrew word, they say the word haya, which is the verb to be or to become. I'm sorry. Anyways, okay. Okay, it's the Hebrew word haya means is or became. It can mean either one. And so these people say that haya means became, so the earth became formless and empty. God originally made it good, and the earth became formless and empty and became dark. God had originally made it light. It became. And so this word became then says that Satan came down and kind of perverted what God had made. This clarifies, did you ever wonder, when did Satan go bad? By the way, does Satan show up in Genesis chapter 3 with the serpent and all that kind of stuff? So he's down on the earth in chapter 3. When did he really go bad? Okay, and this gives Satan a place then with this gap theory. You're saying the earth became formless and empty, that Satan was cast to earth. He was an angel of light that was cast to earth during this time period, and tells us what happened. A couple passages people use to support this is Isaiah chapter 14 and Ezekiel chapter 28. Tell us about a little bit about Satan's career. Isaiah 14, Ezekiel 28. Isaiah 14 is questionable. Ezekiel 28 may have a better shot at it, but to clarify Satan's initial work. Tohu avohu. Okay, tohu avohu. This is not tofu. This is tohu. Tohu avohu. And this means formless and empty. Basically formless, and I think the King James says a void or something, but it's formless and empty. And the earth became formless and empty. Tohu vohu. The people that hold the gap theory jump over to Jeremiah chapter 4:23, and they say, hey, there's the statement, tohu vohu, formless and empty. It's used in Jeremiah as a judgment on sin. And therefore, you know what I'm saying, it ties in with Satan and this judgment on sin, like that. So these are all things. It gives the dinosaurs, the poor dinosaurs got to have some place to go. And so this puts them in, the dinosaurs. Satan does his thing. He kind of makes dinosaurs. Does Satan often duplicate the works of God? Does Satan often duplicate the works of God? So now God's going to create some stuff, so Satan tries messing around with stuff. They're big and they got teeth and they eat people and stuff. Or actually, no people, but they, so that's... Now, here's some negative things on the gap theory. Jeremiah chapter 4, verse 23 to 26, indeed does mention that tohu vohu, formless and empty. But in Jeremiah, it's a judgment on sin. But in Genesis chapter 1, is there any mention of sin in Genesis chapter 1? Is there any mention of in Genesis chapter 2 of sin? Sin comes in Genesis chapter what? 3 with the serpent. So what are these people doing? In the gap theory, are they reading sin back into that context? Is there any sin in the context of chapters 1 and 2? No. So this is a projection of them taking this back in, and the question is, it seems out of context because in Genesis 1, there's no mention of sin. And so therefore, it seems to me dragging something into context that shouldn't be there. Is Satan the point in Genesis 1 or 2? Is Satan really the point? Is Satan mentioned anywhere? No, okay? And even when he shows up in the guise of a serpent, is he really mentioned as Satan is a serpent, or is it the serpent speaking? And stuff. Yeah, it's a serpent. So we learn that the old serpent dragon from the book of Revelation tells us that the serpent was Satan. But you got to kind of work with that. So Satan is not the point. To put Satan into Genesis 1:2 just again seems out of context. There's no context for it. The word became darkness should be read as all your translations, modern translations, read it was. And the earth was formless and empty. The earth did not become formless and empty. The earth was. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was formless and empty. What I'm going to suggest here is, well, we'll get to how we're going to resolve this. But so the gap theory, does the gap theory allow for an old earth? Does the gap theory, with the gap there, was it possible Satan was messing around down here for a couple billion years? Yeah, so it's possible. So the gap theory allows for an old earth. Does the gap theory actually give an old place to the dinosaurs? Yeah, it does. So that's in this theory came up in the 50s and 60s, 1950s and 60s and things, put out by the Schofield Bible and things. My dad held this theory, okay? Now, here's another way to look at the relationship between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2. Here's another way to look at it, okay? Now, look at how this is translated. Some of your translations, I think the old RSV translated like this. This is Genesis 1:1. How does Genesis 1:1 start in your mind? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, right? Here's how some people translate that first verse. When God began to create, the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. Does that change the meaning? When God began to create, the earth was without form and empty. When God began to create, the earth was without form and empty. Is that different? What does this verse assume? Exactly. The earth was already there, and that God came down merely to shape and form the heavens and the earth. Now, by the way, is that different than the way you would normally read that? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. This view is called a dependent clause view. And what it says is that the first verse is dependent on the second verse, okay? When God began to create, the earth was without form and empty. The earth was already there when he began to create. Is that what the Bible's saying? The earth was already there and God merely shaped it. Okay, so this is the view. When God began to create, the earth was without form, and then God said, "Let there be light." Okay? So this assumes then that what comes before God? The earth is already there. So the earth, the heavens and the earth are eternal, as is God. The heavens and the earth are eternal, as is God, and God merely shapes the heavens and the earth. This is the view that's held by this dependent clause view. So, to be honest, I have problems with this view. How does that change the meaning of the text? Well, what it does is it says there's three things that are eternal, not just God. And that God does not create the heavens and the earth like God speak and they come into being. They were already in being, and God merely shapes and fashions them. So this view is quite different. What are the problems with this view? And I think that's what we've been going over here. It says that there are three things that are eternal: matter, energy, and God. And God merely works with matter and energy. Matter and energy already existed, and God merely shapes them. And I think that's a problem. I don't think that's what the Bible is saying, but that's what the RSV said. Now, here's the independent clause view. So if you have the gap theory, there's a gap between Genesis 1 and 2. Satan's involved. The dependent clause view said that the earth was already there and God just shaped it. Okay, it was formless and empty and God just formed and filled it. The independent clause view goes like this. Independent clause, initial creation. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Wham, bam. God creates the heavens and the earth. It's kind of like a summary title, a summary independent clause that summarizes the whole thing. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Okay, independent clause stands by itself, big thing. Now, the second verse is a negative circumstantial clause. It says, when he originally wham-bammed the earth, okay, God wham-bams, creates the heavens and the earth, what was it initially like? What was it initially like? It was formless and empty. Formless and empty. Okay, when God originally made it, did he make it formless and empty? And darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Now, when God wham-bammed the earth, did he make it perfect? All of a sudden, just wham-bam, everything was there, all the animals were there, everything was there. Did he just go wham-bam and it was all there? Did he take time to form and fill it? He took form, so when he originally made it, it was formless and empty. And then in the 7 days of creation, he's going to form it, he's going to shape it, and he's going to fill it. So this is a negative, notice it's a negative thing. He originally made the heavens and the earth, and they were formless and empty. And then how does he respond to the formless and emptiness? He shapes it, he forms, and he fills it. And then the main clause, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. Okay? So then you have the main clause. So this is kind of the flow of it. And you say, Hildebrandt, you hold this view. Why do you hold this view over the other ones? Well, will writers write with a certain style? Do writers write in a certain style? Do you have a certain literary style? If I read probably a 10 or 20 page document that you wrote, and you handed me another one, would I be able to tell that it was written by you or not written by you? Yeah, I think I could tell for a lot of people. Some people not, but a lot of people. People write with a certain style. Moses then, this is just a graphic of how this works. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and empty, and then boom, let there be light, and there's light. So this is kind of an independent clause, a negative circumstantial clause, and then the main clause. And that's kind of just a graphic of how to do that. But, okay. Independent clause view. How does Moses write? Now, how do I know how Moses writes? I don't know, but I've got a book of Genesis that's claimed to be written by Moses. So I look at the next chapter, and guess what I find in the next chapter? Starting with verse 4, in the next chapter, you've got, this is the account of the heavens and the earth when they were created. It's kind of like a summary statement. This is an account of the heavens and the earth when they were created. Then what's the next verse say? It says, when the Lord made the earth of the heavens, there was no shrub in the field, had yet appeared on the earth. There was no plant in the field, and God had not sent rain. Are all those negative things God had not yet done? No shrubs, no plants, no rain. And so you get this negative circumstantial clause, saying there's no shrubs, no plants, no rain. It tells you all these negative things that are not there. And then you hit the main clause. The main clause in verse 7, the Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground. How does chapter 1 differ from chapter 2? In chapter 1, does God work with the skies and separating the waters above and below? It's about the world. It's about the universe. In chapter 2 is the focus on human beings. And so what you've got is this contrast between chapters 1, which is the 7 days of creation of the universe, and in chapter 2 he says, okay, I'm going to go after Adam and Eve now, and so he develops in more detail. He mentioned Adam and Eve in chapter 1, but now he goes into more detail on how he formed, actually shaped Adam and shaped Eve and things. So this then independent clause, negative circumstantial clause followed by a main clause, is that exactly the same structure that he used in chapter 1? Yes. And so what I'm suggesting is that this structure then in chapter 2 helps us understand how chapter 1 should be understood. Okay, does that make sense? So I'm trying to use Moses to understand Moses. You see? Okay. Anyway, so that's the methodology I'm trying to use. And I think it works pretty well here. By the way, I should say about the gap theory, no, it doesn't fit the grammar. It doesn't fit the Hebrew grammar. It contradicts this literary structure that Moses uses. And by the way, it doesn't help us with Satan. Satan isn't in Genesis 1 or 2. So it helps with those problems. So